Welcome to Analytics Training. This course is the advanced class, which is Analytics Designer, where we learn how to design reports from scratch. The first thing that we're going to do is log in to Organizer. So I have a login and password. And in order to access Analytics, you'll click on the Analytics menu option at the top. If you don't have the Analytics menu option, it means that you don't have access. So you can contact Avetta to get access to Analytics. Now you'll notice in Analytics that the menu items are on the left side of the page, and this is the new style that all the windows will have when we are upgraded to Avetta Connect. So you're getting a precursor taste of Avetta Connect when you go into Analytics. Now, the first thing that you see is your main dashboard. The main dashboard is created for you by Avetta, and the dashboard will contain information that is applicable to your company. So I'm in the demo company, but everybody will have these 6 tabs, and every tab has information that we've determined is commonly requested. So that's your main dashboard, which everybody has. Now, before we go any further, there are some terms that everybody should know. And I'm just going to bring those over here. So a forced flag. So a forced flag is when a client changes the flag status, and it's typically from red to green, so that a supplier is able to come on site and perform some work, even if all the requirements for green status have not been met. So that's what a forced flag is. We've seen your home page will take you to the main dashboard. I also want you to understand what an analysis is. An analysis is one of the 3 types of things you can create in analytics. You can have an analysis, you can have a dashboard, and you can have a report. An analysis contains 1 or more visualizations and at least 1 table. So the visualizations that you might have are a table, and this is a table here. You might also have a chart, or you could have what's called a crosstab. So a crosstab is a lot like an Excel pivot table, or you could think of it as an Excel table. So visualizations are created in an analysis, and then anything that's created in an analysis can be saved and then added to a dashboard or a report. And a dashboard is a group of visualizations created in analysis, and it lends itself to being viewed on screen with various tabs, like the main dashboard here. A report can be designed and have the same tables, charts, and crosstabs, but the design of it lends itself to being printed or presented as a report that is one long document. Now there's some other things that we're going to see. If we go to the library, and you'll see these are the things that you can create, and whatever you create is listed in the library. And in the library, you'll have My Items, So my items are the things that are available for you to see. And then you'll also have shared with me. And of course, those are items that have been shared. You might have additional folders here that contain other items that other people have shared with you, but you will always have the standard library. In the standard library are different analyses and maybe a dashboard that have been created for you. There aren't any reports in the standard library, but there are lots of analyses and one main dashboard. A dashboard has an icon that is like this little red dial. A report looks like a piece of paper with a bent down page. And a analysis is a green icon with a little person on it. And you can open these and look at them. And again, these are out of the box analyses that Avetta has created for you that will be populated with your data. Now, if you ever see one that has this DR in parentheses, DR stands for dynamic report, and these are the reports that were available in Organizer reports. So when we go to Avetta Connect, you will no longer have Organizer reports, you'll just have analytics, but everything that you could see in reports that was very meaningful and used by our clients is here in the standard library, which is under Shared with Me. So you could open those and take a look at them. So that's some key definitions. And next, we want to take a look at one of these analyses. And under Resources, there is an analysis called Table of Contents. And this is very, very useful when you're designing your own analysis dashboard or report. So if you open up that analysis called Table of Contents, what this is a report that shows you all the fields in the underlying database and what table they are in. So every single field and table is available to you to include in an analysis dashboard or report, and this analysis provides you with the information about what the column name is and what table it's in. And of course, you need that information when you're designing your own analysis. You will notice with this icon here, which says export when I hover on it, you can export this to Excel. And if I click on that, I could go to Excel or a CSV file or a PDF file. Excel would probably be the most helpful because then you can sort, filter, find whatever it is that you're looking for. Find the column name and the table name. So I definitely wanted to point that out as very useful. Now, the other icon I'm going to point out here is this one that says Add to Visual Gallery for use in dashboards and reports. So I said earlier that everything gets created in an analysis, and then you can save it. And where do you save it? You save it to the Visual Gallery. Then once it's in the Visual Gallery, you can include it in a dashboard or a report. Now, we asked that you complete the first class, which is the Analytics Viewer course, before you took this one. And in that course, we went to a dashboard and we saw that you could interact with that dashboard and filter. And when you filter, if you clicked a value in a chart, everything on that tab was also filtered as long as that item was initially created in the same analysis. So best practice is that when you're creating a dashboard, all the charts, tables, and crosstabs that you include come from the same analysis. That way, when I click to filter here, I see that this table is filtered, that this chart is filtered, this chart is filtered, this chart is filtered, this one's filtered. Now this one isn't filtered because I don't see this little tag here, and that must mean that it comes from a different analysis. And all this is leading up to the best practice that when you name your items and you save them to the visual library, you have a naming convention that suggests which analysis the item was initially created in. And we'll cover that again. It's a naming convention for things that you add to the visual gallery. So there's some review questions here that we can go over. So benefits of analytics, and what we're looking to provide is visual and intuitive reporting so that you can make better business decisions. We're also looking to provide self-service reporting. So you saw that every field and every table is available to you so that you can self-service and design what you need to see and give you improved visibility into your data. So what do you need to do before you create a dashboard or report? Well, we saw you first have to create an analysis. Anything that you want in a dashboard or report, and that could be a table, chart, or crosstab, any visualization, would have to be saved to the visual gallery. Are there pre-built visualizations? Yes, there are. We saw that there is a main dashboard that you see when you click on the home, and there are all these analyses in different folders under the standard library folder. And then what is the visual gallery? So the visual gallery is your personal library where you've saved the visualizations so that they can be included in a dashboard or a report. And with that, we're going to go on to the next chapter where we take a deeper look at analyses. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean up my folder here, and I'm going to delete this folder, and I'm also going to delete some other things here, just so I'm back to a clean slate. So the first thing that we want to do is I'm going to copy an analysis. And when I copy the analysis, I want to put it in my own folder. So we did that in the first class where we said we want to add a new folder, and this gear goes with this folder. And I'm just going to call it Nancy's folder. And then I'm going to go under Shared with Me into the standard library, and I'm going to look at the items that are under suppliers. and I see that there's analysis called unresponsive suppliers, and I'm going to open that. And I want to create a copy of this. So I'm going to click on the gear icon. And often we see in the gear icon that you can rename or you can duplicate. If there is no rename, then that means that this comes from the standard library and you cannot change it. But you could duplicate it and then make any changes that you like. So I'm going to click duplicate. Do you really want to do that? I'm going to say yes. And it doesn't necessarily look like anything happened here, but if I go back to the library and I go into my items, I'll see that I do in fact have a copy of that analysis. And to move it into, oh, I've just opened it. To move it, I'm going to click on this tiny little icon here with a left mouse click and then drag and drop it into the folder. And when I do that, I can see that now I have that copy of an analysis in my folder. Now it is possible to come down here, grab this and drag and drop it, but you wouldn't want to do that because this is a standard analysis that cannot be modified. So your best bet is to just leave it here, open it, duplicate it, and then modify the copy. Now I can rename it. So I'm going to go to the folder and I'm going to open it. And now when I click on this gear icon, I see that this is one that I can modify because I've made a copy of it. Not because it says copy in the header, but because I have this rename option. So I'm just going to take off this and I'm just going to call it unresponsive suppliers and last login date. So we're going to modify this to include the last login date. So I'm going to say OK. And now that we have this table, we're going to try to answer the question, who are the unresponsive suppliers? Who are my unresponsive suppliers? And when did they last log into Avetta? So that I can see who it is that I should be following up with. So the next thing I want to point out is that we have a number of menu items here where we can modify this analysis. I also want to point out that we can collapse this table or we could expand it. And we could also click on data and our table is still down here where we could expand or collapse. But clicking on data will show to you the tables and the fields from those tables that were selected to be included in our data space. So that's what the data space is, the collection of columns that we selected from these tables. That's our data space. Now, when it's in the data space, it may be displayed or hidden in our table. So you can see I've selected 4 columns here and another 3 here. That's 7 in the data space, but 2 are hidden and 5 are selected. Another thing is that 3 of them come from one table, that's this one, and we can tell that by this blue stripe across the top. And then these two come from this table. So the two with the red stripe come from here. Now it doesn't matter what order these are in. As a matter of fact, I can drag and drop them and put them in any order that I like. And I do that by clicking on the left icon for each column. And I can also size my columns by clicking on the right icon. So if I decide I want to widen or make narrower the columns, I can do that here. So I can expand or collapse the table, and I can expand or collapse the data selection by clicking on data. So also in the table, I can click on the gear icon here. So notice there is a menu item for this whole analysis, and then there is this menu item for just this table. And here's where I can show or hide columns. So here are my 7 columns. So one of these is all. But here are my 7 columns that I selected above to be in my data space. And then here are the 5 that are displaying, and the 2 that I've selected to hide or not display. And what we're going to do next is we're going to add a column to my data space. So make sure that the data field or the data selection is showing. And I'm going to select to add supplier last login date. So I'm going to select that column there. And then to save it, I'm going to click on the OK button down here. So I click OK, and this is going to spin, and then I have an additional column added to my data space, and I see it by default. I see it in my table. And now if I wanted to, I could sort these. So I can click on this column and say sort A to Z. And if I prefer, I can sort the other way. But this shows me the suppliers that have been the longest in coming in and updating. So I've been able to answer the question, which are my non-responsive suppliers and when was the last time they logged in? So that's a very simple manipulation that helps us answer a question. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do another exercise. And in this exercise, we're going to build a table completely from scratch, or we're going to build an analysis completely from scratch. And we're going to answer the question, why does a supplier have a red flag? So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. And I want to show how to start an analysis from scratch. And the way that I do it is if I go to my library and I just look at my items, I see that what I have there is just the main dashboard. Now if I click on analysis, so we saw how I can open analysis by just clicking on the title of it. But if I want to create a brand new one, I just click on the analysis menu item and I have a new blank analysis. If I go back to the library, I see there it is. That's what I just created. If I click on dashboard, it's going to ask me to select the items I want from the visual gallery, select the items that I want to include. Now I'm not going to select anything, but if I go back to the library, notice that this was called Untitled Dashboard. If I go back to the library, I now have an untitled dashboard in my items. So every time you click on one of these buttons, it creates an item for you. If you decide you don't want an untitled dashboard, you can just click on the trash can over here to delete it. Now, I do want to start a new analysis. So I'm going to open that analysis, and the first thing that we're going to do is rename it. So I'm going to click on my gear icon, and I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to call it Why Are Suppliers Red Flag? And then I'm going to say OK, and I see that it's no longer called Untitled. And the next thing I want to do is select some data for this analysis. So I'm going to click on the drop down, and here are the tables I can select from. And I'm going to pick the flag table. And it shows me the fields that are available. So I'm going to uncheck and then just check the fields that I want. And the fields that I want are supplier ID, audit ID, flag color, flag name, or I'm sorry, flag category, flag color, and flag is forced. I'm going to pick those. And if I say OK, I see now that I have a table that includes those 6 fields. So these, I now have 6 fields in my data space. And I'm going to say I would like some more fields. And you'll notice that when I click down, I don't have all the choices I had above. And that's because I have to have a key field that links the 2 tables together. So flag can be linked to audit detail. So I'm going to select that. And just on this same idea, you'll notice that audit detail can be linked to these tables. And so it goes. So I'm not going to select all those fields. I just want audit is active. I want that one. And I want audit status. And audit status changed date. So I'm going to say OK. And I'm going to notice that now I have 3 additional fields added to my data space and to my table. And we're going to add a few more fields. I'm going to click here. And now I want to select from the connection table. And I don't want all of those. I just want the connection flag color. And I want to know if the connection flag is forced. And we have an important note. You want to remember that connection flag is a property of the connection between your organization and the supplier organization. So it's not a property of that individual supplier, it's a property of your connection. That's the connection flag color. And we want two more fields. We want the supplier name and the client name. So I could click down here and say, oh look, client. I bet I could get client name from there. Or your performance will be better if you pick from the fewest number of tables possible. So I see I already have client name and supplier name here. So I'm just going to add those two additional fields, say OK. And now I see supplier name and client name have been added. And again, I could reorder these any way I like. Now, since we want to ask or answer the questions, why do suppliers have red flags? Then we're only interested in those suppliers that have a connection flag of red. So if I look at the last page or click on this double arrow here, I'm going to see that I have 330 pages in this report. And I really just want to see those where the connection flag color is red. So what I'm going to do is filter this. So I'm going to collapse the data because I'm done with that. And I'm going to open the filter. And again, I could close the filter, open the filter, and it's highlighted in gray when it's open. And it's not highlighted when it's closed. So I'm going to open it, and I'm going to say that I want to filter so that I see when my connection flag color is equal to red. And you have to know to type in red, R-E-D, or green, G-R-E-E-N, or amber, A-M-B-E-R, not yellow, but amber. So typically, if you want to filter, you can see what the values are. Here, they could be yes or no. Here, they could be insurance or paperwork. But when it's flag color, you have to say red, green, or amber. So I'm going to add that filter. And now when I look at how many pages are in my table, I only have 165 pages, and it makes sense that now that I'm filtering, I would have less items included. And you'll notice that as soon as you click on Add, you have this notation here, so that I could remove that filter, or I could do something different and replace this with something different. The next thing I would like to do is I would like to group these together. So rather than having to scroll through and look at each individual line item, I want to group them by supplier ID. So I'm going to click on my supplier ID column, and I'm going to say group. And when I do that, it gathers together all the supplier ID line items, or all the line items by supplier ID. So now these are all grouped together. Now I might also want to group by client name, just since ID and name are kind of the same. So I'm going to say group by client name. And when I do that, that column is going to move to the front. So whenever you group by a column, it moves to the front of the table. So now I have a supplier ID. Oh, client name, I didn't want to group on that. I wanted to group on supplier name. So I'm going to click supplier name and group. And now that makes sense. This is the supplier and that's the supplier name. And I could also group by the connection flag color. And we've already filtered to show that connection flag color is red. So we could even hide this column if we wanted to, because we know that connection flag color is red. So if we wanted to, we could hide that column. So it's still part of the data space, but now it's just not included in my table. And it's part of my data space, so I can filter on it. And I could collapse that as well. And there's a tip up here. If I wanted to unhide, and you'll remember, we already went on to this, options to display or hide. If I wanted to show it again, I could bring it back by clicking on the gear icon and columns. And also here, you'll notice group is here. And you can see the things I did. So clicking on group is another way to group, as well as clicking on the column. And same with sort. I could sort here, or I could sort by clicking here. And of course I could close all those options as well. And we're just going to review the table now. And if you remember, our initial question was, why is my supplier have a connection flag color of red? And now that we've grouped these together and filtered, we can see that all these requirements that are red flagged would be the reason. And we could also filter on flag color so that we didn't see these green flags, because maybe we're not concerned about those, because those are fine, so that we would show just the red flags. So we could filter on flag color as well. So that helps us answer what is going on with each supplier and what requirements they need to address. All right, the next thing we're going to do is talk about how to add a formula and how to add a chart. So I'm going to create another new analysis. So if I look at library, why are suppliers red flagged? Let's just take that and put that into the folder that we created. And I'm going to create another analysis. And in this analysis, I'm going to add a formula. And we're going to rename this. And we're going to call it days until audit expiration. So we're going to answer the question, how many days are there until an audit expires? So that I can follow up and make sure people know that that expiration date is coming up. And of course, the first thing we have to do is create our data space. So I'm going to select the audit table. And the fields I want are audit ID, audit class, audit name, audit for, audit is active, audit effective date, audit expires date. That's our critical piece of information there. And the update date. And when I say OK, I see those fields. And now I also want some information from the supplier table. And the only thing I want from this table is the supplier name. So I'm going to take that field and say OK. And that's the data that I want. So I'm going to close that, and I'm going to put my supplier name here at the front. And then I'm going to add a filter. And I'm going to say that I am concerned with audit expire date and I want a sliding date rather than a specific date. So I could pick a date off the calendar, or I can say this is a sliding date and I want to see today. And you can see all these choices that I have. But I want to know those audits that have an expiration date that's, oops, I want it to be greater than today. And I'm going to add that filter. And now I see that filter is there. And the next thing that we're going to do is create a formula. So I'm going to collapse my filter and expand my formula. And I want to know how many days until expiration. So I know what today is, and I know the expiration date. So how many days are there between today and this expiration date? So I'm going to call this days until expiration. And now I need to put in a formula. And these items over here are going to help me get the syntax correct on different formulas. So if I click on the formula drop-down, I can see different formulas, and I want to know a date difference. So I'm going to select that, and it's going to tell me that the operation is date diff, and then I need 3 arguments. So the first thing I need to know is the interval. So what do you want to count this in? And I want to count this in days. So I'll say day. And then I want to know the difference between these 2 dates. And the first date is going to be from the column. So I'm going to say I want a column there. So I'm going to highlight that date 1. And I'm going to select the audit expires date. And you'll see that in my formula, this is the appropriate syntax. It comes from the audits table, and this is the name of the field, and that goes in square brackets. And the second D is going to be today. So I'm going to click on the formula, and I'm going to look at these options, and I'm going to select Get Date. In other words, get what today is. So find the difference between this date and this date in days. And I want that data type to be a number, and I'm going to add that value. And when I click on Add, what I get is a column called Days Until Expiration. And now I can sort on that column. And I can tell which audits are coming up on expiration. And if you don't like the minus sign there, you could either switch these two values around, or you could multiply it by -1. So, or you could just say, hey, 25 days till expiration. So that exercise describes how to add a formula and answers the question, which audits are expiring soon? And in our next exercise, we're going to add a chart. So to do this exercise, I'm going to go into my library, and I'm going to add that to my folder. And I'm going to expand that folder. And we created this earlier, this why are suppliers red flagged, and I'm going to open that analysis and add a chart to it. So to open it, I'm going to click on the title, why are suppliers red flagged? So now this is open. And I want to add a chart. So I'm going to click on Add Chart. And when I do that, I get this description of the chart. And I'm going to define my chart. So I can pick what kind of chart I want. And you can see as I pick different chart types, my values or my fields change. And we're going to do a bar chart. And we're going to say I would like a chart that shows flag category, and I want a distinct count of the supplier IDs for each flag category. And my relevance is going to be off, so when I say OK, here's my chart. So this is the number of distinct suppliers that have a requirement in each flag category. So creating those charts is so easy. And when I close or click the gear icon here, so I can collapse the whole thing, just like I can collapse the table. Or if I just click the gear icon, I collapse the criteria just the same way I could expand or collapse the criteria by clicking on the gear icon in a table. So there I see the criteria, or I can collapse the criteria. And I am going to want to use this chart later in a dashboard and report. So I'm going to click the visual gallery, or click this icon to add this chart to the visual gallery. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to say, okay, what do you want to call it? And we talked about that naming convention of saying, let's have a naming convention that identifies what analysis these came from. So I'm going to say that this is my first analysis, and this is my supplier ID by flag category chart. So I'm going to say done. And now I'm going to add another chart. So I'm going to add chart. And I'm going to create a pie chart. And I'm going to say that I would like to have flag name and my data be supplier name. And I'm going to say OK. So here we have how many suppliers we have for each little slice of a flag or a requirement. A flag would be also, flag name would be a requirement name. And I'm going to change this to distinct count. And I think we get about the same thing. And again, I can click the gear icon and collapse those, collapse the criteria. And I want to add that to the visual library. And again, because it comes from my first analysis, I'm going to indicate that with an O1 and say done. And we're going to do another chart. So we'd say add chart. And in this chart, I want to know my flag colors. And I want to know by supplier name, and just the count. And I'm going to say to show the value. Oh, I want this to be a pie chart again. And I'm going to have that off and say OK. And now I have a chart showing how many flag colors I have for each supplier or by supplier. And I'm going to add that to the visual library. And again, I'm going to put an O1 on it to indicate what analysis it comes from. And say done. I can close that. And now I'm also going to come down to the table, and I'm going to say that I'd like the table in the visual gallery as well. And I'm going to indicate it comes from analysis 01, and I'm just going to call it why are suppliers red flagged. So now that table is also in the visual gallery so that I can add it to a dashboard or a report. And we have some review questions. How do I create a chart? Well, from the analysis menu, you can just click on Add Chart, and then select the chart type and enter the chart criteria, and then click OK at the bottom of the criteria. How would I create a column in a table that has a formula? And again, you're going to go to the top of the analysis and select Formula, click Add, and then enter the values that you want for that formula. And remember, you can use those drop downs to help you have the right syntax. And then how do you add a value to the visual gallery? And we saw that you click on the visual gallery icon and then fill in a name. And of course, best practice is to have all visualizations on a dashboard tab be from the same analysis. So that means if you have a good naming convention, it can help you do that. Okay, next we're going to show how to create some cross tabs. And we have a little diagram here about a cross tab. So a cross tab is like a little Excel table where you select values that you want in the columns and you select the values that you want in the row, and the number of items that meet those two, the intersection of those two items, that number appears in your table. And that's what a crosstab is. So we're going to add a crosstab. And we're going to start this with a new analysis. So if I go to my library, here's what I have in my folder. So everything is in my folder. And if I click on analysis, I'll get a new analysis. And I'm going to select some columns from the flag table. And I would like to know the supplier ID, the client ID, and then all these properties of the flag. And I'm going to next click on Audit Detail. So you don't have to click OK after every time. And from Audit Detail, I'm going to pick the audit class, the audit name, and that's all I need from there. From Connection Table, I want to know, is the connection flag forced? And I'm going to get this as well. Connection flag criteria is forced. And then I also want the supplier name. So I'm going to pick that. And that's everything I want. So I'm going to click OK. And here's my data space. So I'm going to collapse the data. Just take a look at my table. And now I'm going to add a crosstab. So I'm going to click to add a crosstab. And just like a chart, this is going to expand the criteria for this crosstab. And the columns that I want are flag category. So show me every flag category. And then my label values are going to be supplier name, aggregate by client ID, and I want a count. And then I do want a sum across the top. So when I say OK, I get this crosstab, or you could call it a chart, that shows my flag categories with my by supplier name. And the number, the aggregate value, is how many client IDs I have. And then I have a sum at the top. And I can collapse the criteria so that I just see my crosstab. And I want to add that to my visual gallery. And this is my second analysis. So I'm going to put an O2 identifier on that. And there's nothing magic about adding numbers. You could put any kind of identifier. It's just a best practice. And I'm going to say done. And now I'm going to add another crosstab. And again, I'm going to have flag color now. And I want to know the supplier names. And I want to aggregate on the count of supplier ID. And yes, I do want a sum across the top. And then here is my chart. For each supplier name, how many of each flag color do they have? And we're going to add that to the visual gallery. And I'm going to add another crosstab. And this is going to be flag color by flag category. And I would like to know how many supplier IDs for each. And yes, I like to have that sum across the top. And here we go. How many supplier IDs are in each category for each color? Let's add that to the visual gallery using my nice naming convention. And I'm going to say done. And one last crosstab. And here I'm going to say I want to know flag category by audit name, and again give me the count and give me a sum. So by category, here's the name and how many suppliers meet that criteria. And we'll add that to the visual gallery and say done and OK. And that is a description of crosstabs. And if we collapsed all of these, we could see that in our analysis, I have one table, and then I have these 4 crosstabs. And I'd like to put this table in the visual gallery as well. And I'm going to call this my crosstabs. And we have a review question here. If I share an analysis, am I sharing all the data in that analysis? So here I have this analysis. Oh, and let's rename this and call it my crosstabs analysis. So if I were to go to my library, and I could share this analysis, and when I did that, I could share it with, I don't have anybody to share it with, but I could share it, and then that means it would show up in a shared folder. And if that person opened it, would they see the same thing that I see? In other words, do they see all the data that I see? And the answer is no. If you share an analysis, you're just sharing the definition of that analysis. And what that user sees is the data that they have access to as part of that analysis definition. Oops, I didn't mean to open that. The next thing we're going to do is create a dashboard. So I click on Dashboard, and the first thing that pops up is what do you want to include? And this is where it's really helpful that I have given myself a naming convention that shows me what analyses these visualizations come from, so that I could put on a single tab just those visualizations that come from the same analysis. So I'm going to add these 4 items, all those things we created that come from our first analysis. So I selected them by clicking here. And if I changed my mind, I could say delete from list. And I'm going to say done. And what I have here is those 4 things that I selected. And I might call this tab. So I might call this dashboard, Nancy's dashboard. So that's the name of my dashboard. And I might call this tab Why are suppliers red flagged? So I've got a dashboard name and a tab name. And maybe I want a second tab. And it's going to say, well, what do you want to include? And I'm going to say, I want to create all these things here. There's my table. And I'm going to rename this tab, and I'm going to call it crosstabs. So I have 2 tabs on my dashboard. And now I look at these and I say, well, this isn't really a very pretty dashboard. I'd like to reorganize it. And if I take a look at the gear icon, I can change the layout. So if I click that, I see that the number of columns that I have are 3. And what I really want is just 2 columns. And now I can move these things around, and I could make a column wider or smaller. And now that maybe looks a little better. Maybe I'll put this over here. Maybe move these around. So now that's a little more organized, better than everything in a long column. Over here in crosstabs, I could rearrange things that are on my crosstabs tab as well. Here we go. Here's all these crosstabs and all this data and the table. And I could reorganize these too. And I could say, I want to change the layout, and maybe I want this one to be free form so that I could just move things without columns. So you'll notice that the hard work happens in creating things in an analysis. That's where your work happens. Then you just save to the visual gallery, add to a dashboard, and then arrange things the way you want to see them by tab in your dashboard. Thanks for watching this course on Avetta Designer.